With us now are the journalists who conducted these interviews. NBC's senior Washington correspondent, Hallie Jackson, who also anchors Hallie Jackson Now on NBC News Now and NBC Nightly News Sunday, and Telemundo news anchor Julio Vaquero, two colleagues I very much admire and love. Hallie, let's start with you. What were your main takeaways from this interview with the vice president?
It's great to see you, Jose. It's great to see Julio as well, who I got to see in Washington yesterday, too. Listen, the vice president is clearly doing, first of all, more interviews, right? We have seen her on a kind of media blitz. She's got that town hall later on tonight. She's done podcasts. She's done, of course, other cable news, Fox News, for example, 60 Minutes. And so to be able to sit down with her and talk about some topics that she hasn't addressed before, I think was interesting and important on some of these issues, including one of the sound bites that you played in the introduction here, related specifically to former President Trump. I spent some time on the campaign trail with her on Monday, flying with her and former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney to Michigan, to Pennsylvania, to Wisconsin, as the two of them really tried to make the case to undecided voters, to disaffected, moderate Republicans, the people she's trying to win over. And her closing argument is largely twofold, right? One, it's about what she would do as president. The other, though, is about, as she sees it, the dangers of a second Donald Trump term, what that would mean, that a second term would be worse than the first, and that people have to remember just how sort of scary it was. That is how they cast these moments. And she talks about that repeatedly. She raises the things that his former staffers have said about him, his former national security officials, the concerns that they have were he to win office now a second time. And so we got into this question of, I think we all remember in 2020, former President Trump saying, frankly, we did win the election before votes were counted on election night in a race that he lost, of course. So I asked her about that. If that happens again, is she ready? Does she have a plan? Here's the response. Last election, the former president came out on election night and declared victory before all the votes were counted. What is your plan if he does that again in 2 weeks?
Well, let me say this. We've got 2 weeks to go, and I'm very much grounded in the present in terms of the task at hand, and we will deal with election night and the days after as they come, and we have the resources and the expertise and the focus on that as well.
So you have teams ready to go? Is that what you're saying? Are you thinking about that as a possibility?
Of course. This is a person, Donald Trump, who tried to undo a free and fair election, who still denies the will of the people.
She also, Jose, of course, did not rule out the potential for a pardon for former President Trump, but expressed, as you heard, that it's extremely hypothetical right now and that her focus is on the next 13 days. Jose.
And Julio, one of the questions that you asked her about was immigration. Did you get any clarity from her on this issue?
Hey, Jose, yes. Well, you know, immigration is really one of the most important issues in this campaign. President Donald Trump actually saying yesterday that it might be more important than the economy. And it has been a real challenge for the Biden presidency. So I actually asked her, right now she's defending the bipartisan bill that includes more resources to secure the border, even shutting down the border and closing loopholes around asylum. But those are policies that President Trump defended when he was a president. So I asked her, on immigration, has Donald Trump won the argument? And this is what she said.
Right now, we're talking about border security, and there's nobody, no Democrat, talking about pathway to citizenship, and immigration relief, and the benefits that migrants bring to this country.
Oh, but there's no question that migrants bring. America is a country that was built in part by immigrants.
But people are concerned about their TPS, their DACA, we're talking about mass deportations.
I'm not talking about.
What do you stand on mass deportations? What's your stand there?
We need smart, humane immigration policy in America that includes a pathway to citizenship, putting more resources at the border in terms of security.
So bottom line, Jose, she believes that we can have a secure border and also an immigration relief, but she mainly talks about securing the border during this campaign, correct?
And Hallie, meanwhile, you pressed the vice president on abortion rights. What does she have to tell you on that?
As you know, Jose, for Democrats, they see this as mobilizing, as a big way that they could potentially turn out voters in some of these key battleground states. It's partly why she's heading to Texas later on in the week. Texas is not a traditional presidential battleground by any means, but it does have one of the most restrictive abortion laws in the country. So she is heading there to demonstrate in many ways, to highlight the, as she sees it, life or death urgency to try to codify federally and protect abortion rights and restore federally the provisions of Roe versus Wade, which, of course, former President Trump installed 3 justices that ended up overturning Roe a couple of years ago. That helped Democrats in the midterms. All of which is to say, big issue, obviously, for her, for Democrats. The question is, to get something done to federally protect Roe, right, to federally codify abortion rights, you have to probably have a Democratic Congress, right? At least the way the political landscape is now. If Republicans were to win control of Congress, win control of the Senate, then that would be a potential sticking point for the provisions that the vice president wants to put in place. So I asked her about that, just pragmatically. Are there any concessions that she would be willing to give? Is there any way that she would reach across the aisle to some of these more moderate Republicans like Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski? Here's what she said.
So is a question of pragmatism, then, what concessions would be on the table? Religious exemptions, for example, is that something that you would consider?
I don't think we should be making concessions when we're talking about a fundamental freedom to make decisions about your own body.
And we went back and forth on this, Jose. She is very clear, Jose, that she is not willing to negotiate here on this issue. She has described the harrowing stories of women who did not receive abortion access and the reproductive rights care that they needed. And that is a focus that she will continue to have for the next 13 days.
And Julio, I know the vice president was tasked early on with finding the root causes of migration. Hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans have had to come to the United States in the last couple of years. And I know you asked the vice president specifically about her positions on Venezuela.
Yes, and it's important. It speaks to the first soundbite that you played at the beginning, Jose. President Trump defining her as a socialist, correct? So what's her position to Venezuela? As we know, President Nicolás Maduro lost an election in the summer. The question is, what is going to happen if he doesn't leave office in January when his term ends? What is the U.S. going to do if Kamala Harris wins the presidency? And this is what she said.
We're not going to use U.S. military there, but let me be very clear also. We must stand firm as the United States of America and respect the will of the people in that election, and I've been very clear about that as it relates to the election that occurred in Venezuela. The will of the people must be respected, and this is why we've also issued sanctions.
Yeah.
So, not sending the military, which is an important thing to know from her, but also talking about sanctions that so far haven't really worked with Venezuela. And the question remains, what will really make Nicolás Maduro leave office? Is there a possibility from the United States to put more pressure on the Venezuelan president after his term ends, Jose?